We're going to be in the book of Job, Job chapter 30, and we will be finishing this chapter this evening. So I'm looking forward to that and getting into the next chapter, chapter 31. So when we were dealing with Job last evening, we saw that Job was beginning to, he started down this kind of a slippery slope, dare I say, with regard to his perspective on God's dealing with him, or I should say the lack of dealing with him as he expects or hopes or would wish that God were dealing with him, that is. So Job starts to sort of intimate, he begins to sort of intimate that God is sort of like backing away from him, so to speak. And so what we're witnessing is Job beginning to really sink under the weight of his affliction. And it is troublesome for him, as it would be for any soul going through something as terrible as the affliction Job was going through. Loss of life, loss of wealth, loss of prosperity, loss of all sorts of things. But yet and still, Job, in spite of how it may appear, he is still a man of faith. He still has not charged God foolishly. He still has not fallen into any kind of a scandalous rebellion. He hasn't done that. But to sort of paint where we left off last night, or to sort of use what we talked about last night to jumpstart the next few verses, I'm going to read verse 16 through 19, and then I'm going to get into verses starting at verse 20 of Job chapter 30. So it says, "And now my soul," Job says, "is poured out upon me. The days of affliction have taken hold upon me. My bones are pierced in me in the night season, and my sinews take no rest. By the great force of my disease is my garment changed. It binds me about as the collar of my coat. He," meaning God, "has cast me into the mire, and I am become like dust and ashes." So this continues a strain, a refrain, I should say, of what Job said in these verses, in previous verses. But he's going down this pathway where it almost seems as though he is kind of indicting God in some way. He didn't go totally in at this point, but it seems that is the direction that he is leaning. And so as we continue to read, let's see if there's any truth to that statement that I'm making here to you, because I am going to be curious as to how many of you view these passages as we read them, and see if we come to some of the same conclusions. So now we get to chapter 30, verse 20. Sorry. Job 30, verse 20. Job says, "I cry unto thee," speaking about God, "I cry unto thee, and you do not hear me. I stand up, and you regard me not. You are become cruel to me. With your strong hand, you oppose thyself against me. You lift me up to the wind. You cause me to ride upon it and dissolve my substance. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living." Brother Pat, let's talk about it.
I'm sorry, brother. That was me forgetting what room I'm in and waving to everybody. I'm sorry I had a brain lapse, but that was a hello.
Oh, okay. All right. Just want to make sure there was anything. All right. So I feel compelled to read this again because I really want all of you to really pay attention to what Job is saying now. Because this verse right here is the first time we hear Job talk like this. He says, I cry unto thee, and you do not hear me. I stand up and you regard me not. You are become cruel to me. With thy strong hand, you oppose yourself against me. You lift me up to the wind. You cause me to ride upon it and dissolved my substance. For I know that you will bring me to death and to the house appointed for all the living. Candy, go ahead.
Just got a couple of verses that when you read that, I was looking at them and I was like, oh, wow. That's
You got verses already. I haven't even started yet.
Job 31:23 says, for destruction from God was a terror to me, and by reason of his highness I could not endure. 7:9 in Job says, as the cloud is consumed and vanisheth away, so he that goeth down to the grave shall come up no more. 7:10 says, he shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him anymore. I probably, if you didn't just say that but in different verses, I'm not sitting here. I was like, oh, wow.
No problem. No problem. Good one, sister. So now, in these verses, Job is lamenting, whining, basically murmuring over the fact that he believes that God is absent. God is not responding. His presence is absent. And though Job makes a prayer, he says that there is no answer. He's detecting no answer. He doesn't see it. And to him, he sees God as being not only distant from Job. See, it's one thing to assume God is distant. But it's another thing to think that he is not only distant, but that he is also in opposition to you. This is what Job's problem is. This right here, this type of talk is a problem. This is a problem. Job's condition is definitely unstable, and the way he's talking is definitely potentially destructive. Notice what he says. He says that he feels that God is carrying him about, carrying him away by the wind. Does anybody here have an idea to what Job is possibly alluding to when he says that he's being carried about by the wind? He says God is lifting him up by the wind and causing him to ride upon it, and his substance is dissolved. Anybody have an idea that they can draw from the scriptures to see what allusion Job might be making? Anybody?
Judgment.
Yes, but what do you think when he says being carried by the wind? He's speaking about being tossed up into the air.
Is that like how like leaves that are falling on the ground are tossed by the breeze and destroyed by it?
Take the illusion from the scriptures, but the idea is absolutely correct, Pat. But think about it in terms of scriptural references that would serve as a metaphor for what is being spoken of, which is metaphorical, by the way. What did they do with the chaff?
it up in the air, and when the wheat and the chaff, they threw it up in the air, and it separated from the wheat.
That's right. And look at what it says here. You lift me up to the wind. You cause me to ride upon the wind like chaff, the wheat thrown up into the air. And it's almost as if Job sees himself as wheat. If I can be so extravagant in this interpretation.
Yeah. You mean chaff?
No. No. You would toss the wheat up into the air to separate the chaff from it.
Right, and the wheat will fall straight to the ground,
Right.
and the chaff will be carried away.
Right, but Job is now putting himself. In other words, he's viewing this situation as God tossing wheat up in the air, basically, and now Job is the chaff.
Okay, because you just said that he was wheat, so it threw my brain off a little.
Right,
So
I said that.
I know that he is wheat, but in this illustration, he's picturing himself as the chaff.
Right, and I believe that Job sees himself as the wheat. You see what I'm saying? Because up to this point, remember, he's like, even in the last chapter, he was talking about how how the good things that he's done, the way he was with the poor folks and the widows and everything. So now he sees himself in the other side of it. He sees God now treating him as though he were wicked. And no, sister, you're not interrupted. You're not interrupting at all. It's no problem, because this is good. Sister Candy, go ahead.
So you remember yesterday when I said it was symbolic to me about how it's like the flesh is unaliving right now. He's unaliving everything in the flesh, the worldly way. He's dying in the flesh. Does that make sense? And now it's like, I'm going to use dry skin for an example, for something shedding the old skin and becoming new. Is right. What I get from like the shaft falling off and flying away. It's like the dead skin from the weather change, the season change, you know what I'm saying? And then your new skin, the new skin coming out from under it will be like very shiny and just good. You know what I'm saying? Alive, so to say. Yeah, alive. That's the word I want to say.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
I'm not sure what you're saying, but we can definitely deal with it. We can definitely deal with it.
The old man is passing away and the new is becoming.
But I'm trying to understand how you're making that fit here, though.
Because the shaft is bad, right?
Shaft is bad, right?
Okay, it's like the old is passing away, so everything he's going through is he's refining. If that makes sense.
Yeah, but that's not what he's talking about. He's not seeing himself as refining. He sees himself as falling apart.
I know, I get that, but like for I don't know, I just see the old passing away, so to say, and he's becoming new. Because I
think the idea of that is definitely true, and is definitely behind this, is definitely undermining this. I mean, when you look at it from God's perspective, and we're going to find out that what you're saying is true. But in this particular context, Job is not seeing himself as being refined. He's not seeing that at all. That's what I'm saying. I think that what you're saying is theoretically true. Not even theoretically, it's literally true from God's perspective. But we haven't got to the point yet where we realize that is the case. But here, Job is certainly not seeing himself as being refined. You see what I'm saying? Oh, we lost her. She's gone, huh? Oh, there she is. Okay. Sister Lisa, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, sorry. But yeah.
What had me thinking is that, you know how he says that God has turned against him.
Right.
And it made me think of, in the beginning chapters, how he had not accused God foolishly. And he's on the verge of that right now. I mean, he's and it brought me to Isaiah 45:9, where it says, "Woe to him who strives with him who formed him, a pot among earthen pots. Does the clay say to him who forms it, what are you making?" So it just reminds me of, like you said yesterday, we're going to be looking down in this chapter. I can see here where the Lord, the rebuke from the Lord might be coming from now. It seems it seems clear here in this.
I'm glad you're seeing that. I think you're right. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. Brother Rodney, go ahead.
I just wanted to take a shot at, is it anything to do with like his sovereignty? Because as I'm reading it, and I'm out of the NKJV, but you lift me up to the wind and you cause me to ride on it. So it's kind of like it's predestined, like his sovereign. You caused me to ride on it. You spoil my successes. So it's already pre-planned. And kind of Pat was mentioning like the leaves and how they wait, they fall, and
Right.
Everything is controlled by the Lord, whether the wind blows this way, whether it blows that way, whether the trees fall in May, whether they fall in June, or it gets hot 90 degrees today, it'll be 65 degrees tomorrow, but it's already, pre-planned. So Job, I put that in a minute earlier, unfiltered layman, in a sense. He's kind of like spoiled in a sense. He's not realizing, and I think a couple chapters earlier, we were talking about how he's breaking him into opening his mind up to more capacity to receive him.
Right. But it looks certainly like he is definitely, he's definitely feeling the ever intensifying affliction that God has brought his way. But Job is now getting into this place where he's getting into that dark place, because there's only so much a human can bear, There's only so much a human can bear. And Job he's getting close to the end. And we know when he gets there, because just before he goes all the way, this is when God steps in. And you can imagine what relief Job must have felt when God broke in. And I think that even though God came in like a storm, blasting Job was probably happy to have that storm rather than, to have, in other words, he would rather have the harshness of God's dealings rather than having no dealing at all. And so, and he repents immediately upon God's dealing with him. Sister Vanessa, go ahead.
He thinks that he's dying.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he really literally thinks he's dying, and God is not having anything to do with him, and he's blowing in the wind without any help from God at all.
Right.
That's what I got out of it.
No, that's exactly what's happening. That's exactly what's happening. He's feeling as though God has abandoned him. And it's interesting to me, like, there is no mention of Job speaking about the enemy, the devil, none of that. And so I love, that's one of the things I love about Job. He is really dealing with this whole situation in probably one of the most faithful ways it can be done without breaking completely, without completely being broken. So it's very good to point that out, sister. Sister Candy, and then Pat.
Goes back to chapter 19 as well, where he says, verse 6, know that God hath overthrown me and compassed me with his net. I cry out of wrong, but I am not heard. I cry aloud, but there's no judgment. He fenced up, I cannot pass, and he hath set darkness in my paths. He stripped him from the ground from his head. And that substance that you mentioned in 22, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it represents wisdom and integrity, doesn't it?
Right.
And then he says, it goes back to like we were talking last night, the every side he was getting hit. I used the waves, but he says he has destroyed me on every side, and I'm gone, and my hope hath been removed like a tree. He's kindled his wrath against me and counteth me as one of his enemies.
All right. Yep. All right. So we see this language here that Job is using, and he's getting. You're seeing his despair in a very heightened sense. So, and it's showing here how sometimes God does withdraw some of the comforts and some of the consolations that we as his people have. And when he withdraws it, we become really sensitive to what what it feels like to not feel the warmth of God's rays upon our flesh. And I mean, not just our flesh, but our internal souls. And so Job is missing that. And so in these passages, like Job, a believer can feel as though God has deserted them. And I know there's been times in my life where you feel like you wonder where God is. And I'm sure that many of you have had moments where you know he doesn't, but it feels like he is. There's a paradoxical element to this whole thing, which can be frustrating to the soul. Brother Pat, you were going to say something.
Well, all I was going to say is that, the position that Job's in, his friends, when they were making accusations against him, they did so without any real evidence. They had no evidence of his wrongdoing. Right. But Job's conclusion that he is going to pass away soon, that actually is there's evidence to base. That's what the direction he's trending in, right? There's it seems like a rational belief. You're at the end. You don't have much life in you. You're done. Right. And so it seems sincere.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sister Mariah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this verse, on these 3 verses before I move on to the next one. And the reason why is because of the question you brought up last evening on this. And I want to see what you thought about this if you got a chance to read ahead. What are your thoughts on verses 20 through 23?
Well, I could clearly see where and how in verse 11 it was speaking for him in a way, for God. Right. And it's because he says here that thou has opposed thyself against me. Right. So he's giving justification to 11 as to why these people are doing what he's done, because God has opposed himself against Job. So I can definitely understand why yesterday you said what you said, because it totally makes sense. And yeah, he's treading on thin ice, buddy. What I would say.
He's on a slippery slope here. He really is. And I really believe that this chapter signals a definite sort of transition and a new low in Job's despair. And here's the thing. Humanly so. I mean, it's like I said also, if you contrast the height of Job's ascent as a godly man, and then you contrast that to him being abased this way, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And so when you look at it, like I said, I believe that this is about as good as faithfulness can be for a man to be under the weight of this kind of spiritual oppression and seeming distance from God. Sister Meg, go ahead.
I think what I'm having a hard time reconciling, and help me, I mean, like in our own mind, like, so in Job chapter 19, right, when he's confessing in this confidence that he has in the Lord, right? I know my Redeemer lives, and I will see him in my flesh when I stand before him. And then we get to stuff like this, it kind of reminds me of like when we're in our own lives, and like we know that the Lord is with us, right? We know that we believe, we know that we're saved, we know that we have salvation, but in our suffering, to be honest, sometimes it's like, I've declared these things and I know them, but I'm not feeling that right now. Right. And so even though that these declarations are made, like, but at the same time, like in verse 30, he's like, 21, he's like, 20, he's like, I cry out to you for help, but you did not answer me. When I stand up, you merely look at me. You have turned against me with cruelty. You harass me with your strong hand. And I'm thinking to myself, like, do you think that he thinks that God is not answering him? Or is it just because he's not seeing anything?
Well,
You see,
I think that, well, the thing about it is those go together, don't they? If he's not, Job is accustomed, like many of us, we're accustomed to being made sensible to the fact that that God is with us. I'm sure that most of us right at this very moment, we feel and know the joy of the Lord. Like right now, us together right now. You can't be in a situation like this and not have a sense, I don't mean just a carnal sense, I mean a spiritual sense of the presence of the Lord with us, do we not? So when we get like this, Job isn't getting anything. He's not having fellowship. His wife is not in the picture. His workers, business associates, all this out of the picture. We read in the recent verses just before this, that even the people that used to look up to him are now treating him as though he is beneath them. The people he helped. So you have to understand, Job has this is not just one of the kind of things like, Job, you should get your act together and trust in the sovereignty of God. Because I don't care how much you understand about the sovereignty of God, when you're going through something like this, you lost your kids, you lost everything, your health, everything. You have to ask yourself, no matter what I know biblically, theologically, when there's nothing, it is hard not to question. It is hard. And so Job is really dealing with something that is very, very painful.
I think that for us too, like, I can't imagine any of all this happening. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I could not imagine back to back losing my kids, losing my whole, I could not, that's the thing that sticks with me throughout this whole time. And I have to watch myself in when we're reading chapters like 29 and 30, because I don't want to look as though I'm judging Job in the book.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. That's the part that we have to be careful about ourselves, because listen, I know that every one of us can tell a story about how we had some kind of spiritual decline that was often associated with going through a hard time. And if we don't see that in ourselves, we may know of someone else who has. But I can tell you, how many people do any of us know that have experienced something to the equivalent of what we hear Job has ever received? Just take his 10 kids alone. Just take that alone. Just that.
Could you imagine going to a funeral with 10 caskets?
10. And so that's just his children. And that's not just that's massive. If a woman today, because women, they have that natural affection for their children. And so imagine just losing one. 2 would be catastrophic. 2 might make you willing to turn your back on God forever. Like Lisa says, that would be devastating to lose any child. But can you imagine 1 or 2? Can you imagine 10 all at once? And so that was just that part of it. I'm cutting Job some slack here. And it's easy for us to sort of survey his responses to this whole thing and come to these calculated conclusions based on how his practical responses might not line up with what he should know doctrinally speaking. But when you've gone through some serious hardship, something like this, it would be beyond the pale. And then on top of that, to feel that communion that you've enjoyed so many years with the Lord has been severed, that's one thing. But Job is compounding the separation between him and God being distant, with God also actively opposing Job. So the passive aspect of God's dealing with Job is that he's absent. But Job was also assigning an active aspect that God is is actively opposing him. This is what he's feeling. And so this is serious. This is very serious. But what I'm going to say again, how many of us could go this far from the time everything first started with Job? How many of us would be at chapter 30 right now? That's what you have to ask yourself.
I could only pray. That's all I could do. I hope that I could be.
Can anybody here say that I'm a chapter 30 Job? You got to ask yourself that. I can tell you right now, I don't see me being that way. Now I do know that the strength, God he upholds you. I understand that. But when you look at these things from a practical standpoint, if Job is handling it this way, and a very elevated man, one of the men who makes that Hebrews Hall of Fame, as we like to call it, he was one of those few people. And so this man, under tremendous pressure, he managed to hold up in spite of how it looks. But God is still dealing with a man whose heart is sincere. Job is sincerely speaking his heart.
Can I say one more thing?
One more thing. Go ahead.
Okay. I find it interesting how now we're reading this, but the Lord knew all of this was going to happen. He knew it. And he still spoke well of Job. He still said he was righteous. He still said he eschewed evil. He still said he was perfect and was upright and feared the Lord, even though he knew Job was going to go through these moments. And so what I see also is how gracious our Lord is. God is so gracious to us, even in our uncertainties and the things that we speak.
He absolutely is, sister. Absolutely. Sister Shine, your thoughts, sister.
So I'm thinking about the previous chapters before and how he, was dealing with what his friends were saying. And when he said that he would die before he, traded in his integrity. And also the chapter right before this where he's like kind of sounding like he's defending himself. Right. And now in this chapter, it sounds like he's got to the point where he is completely at the whim of God. And like he's bottomed out, and everything he sees, in the physical doesn't look hopeful. Everyone has died around him, and this feeling of despair has taken over him. But when he says in verse 22, when he says, "You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride on it," I feel like that's his submission, and he knows that either way it goes, that, like Rod said, God is in control.
Right.
And I remember. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I remember how I felt losing loved ones back to back and feeling like I wasn't even, like I felt like I was walking around in a dream. It didn't even feel, it felt like a surreal experience. And I felt like it was something that wanted me to, lose all hope. But it was like I still had God. And what God gave me is enough, even if he took away everything I had, because I lost my mother in 2020. And 3 months later, my aunt died. The following year, my father was unalive. And the year, not even a full year after that, my children's father was unalive. So I felt like I was walking around like the Walking Dead,
Right.
And I was completely at the whim of God. And I just was like, whatever you need to do, God. I've already lost so much. And you kind of get to a point where it's like you do feel at despair, but you're getting tossed to and fro, and you're going along for the ride, because even though it feels like, the worst thing in the world, I still feel like Job had that trust, and that he knew, where's the he says, into the house appointed for all living, surely he would not stretch out his hand against the heap of ruins if they cry out when he destroys it. He knows that God is in control, and he knows that that his life is, like, I kind of feel like what I think Candy said this, like, I think he felt like he was dying. So he was just like at that point where he was just like, he was succumbing to, he was willing to just whatever God wanted him to do.
Wow, sister, you know, I'll say something we all always know. We talk to each other, we have fellowship, we get around the word of God, but you never know what a person has gone through. You never know. And Sister Shine, that's just unbelievable, because that's got to be in some way kind of fresh, I think. 2020 is not that long ago. It's 5 or 6 years ago, but the fact that you had to go through that, unimaginable. And so you definitely have a glimpse into what this is, what he's going through, like how you were describing, sort of walking around and sort of like this dreamy, right. That's, go ahead, sister.
It's a surreal thing, because when you have like a glimmer of hope, like sometimes things happen far apart, like, but he lost everything so quickly.
Right.
And it's like you don't even get a chance to like feel like you can breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Even every breath is just like,
right.
It's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're thinking about your loved ones that took their last, and you're, thinking about all of that. But what God did in those times, he built the character, in me, that I didn't think I was the type of person that would be able to handle anything like that. Wow.
Yeah.
And he showed me him through what I experienced.
Wow. Thank you, sister, for sharing that. That's pretty remarkable. And I really thank you for sharing that, because that's the perfect type of a response that kind of goes good with what we're talking about, even though it's a very real situation. So it's a blessing for you to be able to talk about it.